You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Folks, as I said, this global pandemic is affecting all kinds of different people, Africa and the Caribbean as well. And so check it. I got a text message. I got this text message how many days ago? It was a couple of days. It was yesterday. And this was from a high-ranking official in the Bahamas. And I'm not going to pull it up because I don't want you to see their name. And what they sent me was this story. And the story talked about the United States seizing Cayman medical supplies. Medical supplies that were headed to the Cayman Islands. And the person said, looks like we will have to go to China for supplies. The boat had arrived in Nassau and was ordered to return the supplies to the U.S. Sad thing is that before the virus was taken seriously, the U.S. sold these medical supplies to China. Then they said, no doubt the U.S. also is purchasing supplies from other countries, the privilege of the mighty. That was a question in today's White House briefing. And then Donald Trump tried to flip it to drugs. He did that. Joining us right now is foreign policy and national security professional Johanna Leblanc. Johanna, glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered. You are from Haiti. You know many of these leaders out here. Give us a sense of what's happening in these Caribbean countries, these African nations, especially in the Caribbean, where the United States is playing, God, snatching equipment. I mean, that was a text message I got from a high-ranking official in the Bahamian government.
Roland Martin, thank you so much for having me on air this evening. I've been on television throughout the continent of Africa discussing the impact of COVID-19 as it pertains to the continent. And besides what you just said about the seizing of personal equipment to protect professionals during this crisis, there's another issue that needs to be discussed, and that is the repatriation of foreign nationals in the midst of this crisis. The unfortunate reality is that the administration is sending folks back to their home country during this crisis, and we're talking about not individuals who have necessarily criminal records, but just individuals who may have entered into the country illegally or who may have overstayed their visas or whatnot. So what I've been calling for is the complete suspension of the repatriation of all foreign nationals during this crisis. And here is why. On one, we know in particular the continent of Africa, it is comprised of roughly 1.3 billion people, right? So sending someone back, let's say, for example, to Senegal, South Africa, or Nigeria could further, sending a group of individuals rather to those countries could further exacerbate the existing issues in the country. In particular, the administration says that folks are being tested prior to the departure to their respective countries. And even if that were true, we know that the incubation period is 14 days. So by sending those folks back to their countries in a time like this, it certainly undermines the national security and the safety and health of all citizens. And also, it could have serious economic implications. We understand that those countries already have fragile economies. In some of these countries, the population, because of lack of health care, because of systemic racism, as we say right here in the United States, people have not always been able to receive the help that they need in healthcare wise. But unfortunately, a lot of these governments are just not in the position to negotiate with a superpower like the United States. So they are left with no options but to accept these foreign nationals. But the reality is that by law, there is actually no law that requires those countries to accept their citizens, other than usually what's done through an agreement under the Vienna Convention Consular Act of 1963. It is essentially an agreement between those foreign states with the State Department saying that when it comes time to repatriate your citizens, this is what we will do as the United States government, and this is what you're going to do. So oftentimes those countries, especially the United States, has to rely on diplomatic avenues in order to make that happen. Again, there is no actual obligation, but however, what people need to be aware of is the reality that sometimes countries are slapped with a sanction for not repatriating their citizens, right? And a lot of these small countries with already fragile economies are just not in a position economically to be slapped with an international sanction from the richest country in the world, the United States of America. So they are left with no resort but to accept their nationals. So I think that is something that needs to be brought to the forefront and needs to be discussed. I know that Senegal received a number of its nationals earlier in March, but I'm not sure if they've continued to maintain that process. And then there are so many other countries, and we need to shed light on this matter. And I think now is just not the time to repatriate citizens, because we don't know whether or not these folks are infected, because there have been a number of articles out there showing that a lot of these detention facilities where you keep immigrants those people are exposed to the virus, and even our prisons here in the United States as well. So we don't want to further put those foreign countries at risk by repatriating their citizens back to their country. So it needs to be discussed. Advocates needs to continue to raise alarm, to ask Congress to perhaps, through the next stimulus legislation, perhaps restrict the use of funding for the purpose of deportation at this time until further notice, right? Because I think it is the humane thing to do to hold off on deportation in the midst of a global health crisis. For goodness sakes, those countries are already dealing with how to properly respond to this disaster, and now they have to worry about accepting folks who could potentially be infected by the virus.
Hold tight 1 second. This was the question that took place at today's news conference. I'm going to bring my panel in as well. And so, Henry, go to my iPad.
Views on what they think. Also, very important, different parts of the country. Because you go to the Midwest, it's different than perhaps the East Coast or the West Coast. Now, the West Coast, those numbers are really pretty amazing on the West Coast. Very interesting. So we're going to be announcing that in a very short while, probably Tuesday. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Government officials in Latin American and Caribbean nations, Bahamas, Cayman Islands, have been saying that U.S. authorities are blocking the shipment of PPE in certain cases, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that as
well.
What
What
is
they're
the
doing, we have a tremendous force out there, naval force, and we're blocking the shipment of drugs. So maybe what they're doing is stopping ships that they want to look. We're not blocking. What we're doing is we're making sure we don't want drugs in our country. And especially with the over 160 miles of wall, it's getting very hard to get through the border. They used to drive right through the border like they owned it. And in a certain way, they did. They could drive right. They had human trafficking. They had, all of a sudden, they have a powerful wall up. And they're not driving through that wall. That wall is tough. And it's also loaded up with equipment, cameras and sensors and everything you can think of. On top of that, we have drones flying back and forth over it. So it's a very powerful barrier between Mexico and the United States. A lot of people, though, what they're doing now is they're trying to come in through the waterways, whether it's the Gulf or the ocean itself. And what we're doing is we're being very tough, and we're being tough because of drugs and also human trafficking. And remember, the human trafficking is mostly females. It's mostly females. It's horrible, and what we're seeing is horrible. But you have we have a human trafficking problem worldwide, the likes of which, you think of it as an ancient thing. It's not ancient. It's bigger now than it's ever been before over the last 10 years because of the Internet. The Internet made human trafficking to the extent that it is now, which is massive. The Internet made it so big. So we have a big naval force that's stopping. So maybe when you mention that, maybe their ships are getting caught. But we are stopping a lot of ships, and we're finding a lot of drugs. Yeah, please.
Okay. Mustafa, did you hear that? Again, and all these media people did pick up on that. So here you have leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean talking about ships being stopped and masks and other things being stolen, being basically seized. He gets asked about it. He goes right to drugs. I mean, literally, I'm reading this story here here's a story here. Representative of a local shipping company is dismayed after being told by U.S. officials that they will not be allowed to access imported medical supplies to help in the fight against the deadly COVID-19 virus. Manager of Betty K. Nancy Cartwright told the Tribune early on Wednesday that the company was hired to bring in 3 containers of medical supplies, including personal protective equipment kits for local healthcare workers. After the shipment left the U.S. on Tuesday, Mrs. Cartwright said representatives received a notice from U.S. Coast Guard officials saying they would not be able to access the medical supplies due to a recent order implemented by U.S. President Donald Trump. She said, quote, once the vessel left the port of Miami yesterday, we got instruction from the U.S. Coast Guard and Border Protection that the president put an order in for April 3rd that medical supplies, mainly PPE, are not allowed to leave the United States of America for export. So we are not allowed to manifest those 3 containers, nor can we offload them. We have to send them straight back to Miami for offloading. The ship is coming in today. It's already in today, but we are not allowed to offload those containers. They are to stay on the vessel and go back to the United States. This is impacting black people in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, in Haiti. That's what's happening with this order. Now, what's crazy, Mustafa, is that they're doing this, but am I the only one who remembers a news conference of them talking about shipping the United States? Pompeo said we shipped 19 tons of medical equipment to China.
Well, the amazing thing is that people have such short memories. The president has shared with the country exactly what he thinks about black and brown countries. We know what he said about Africa, and I won't repeat the word that he used.
Shithole countries.
Exactly. We know how he feels about the folks in Haiti. He's shared that many, many times. And, when we had the hurricane that came through and was devastating parts of the Bahamas and people were trying to escape and come to our country, he blocked that for a little while. In Puerto Rico, which is a part of the United States, they utilized a number of different acts to slow the resources that needed to get to Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. The president has shown people who he is. I don't know why people think that the leopard, his spots are going to change. He's shared exactly how he feels about black and brown people and black and brown countries. And he will utilize everything that he has to be able to maximize profits. So if they can move or hold on a product and they can get a higher price for it, then of course others might be able to pay. Then, he is the ultimate when it comes to capitalism, even if it's disaster capitalism or epidemic capitalism.
Dr. Carter, Rob, and then back to Johanna. I'm reading, Henry, if you can go to my phone here. I plugged it to my phone here. So I'm going to read this story here. See if I can turn it. Will this be better? Okay. This is what it says. Jordan Stubblefield. First of all, the United States finally released the ship. Jordan Stubblefield, head of sales at Blue Water, which is one of the distributors for the Cayman Island Health Services Authority, medical supplies, said more than 100 people behind the scenes, ranging from government, the governor's office, and the HSA, were successful in getting the items returned. They explained that that on Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump invoked the Defense Production Act to ban the export of critical medical gear. But we sent 19 tons to China, Rob. This is the quote. We showed them that the items that were being shipped down, the invoices predated the executive mandate. However, they told us going forward, nothing related to COVID-19 that originates in the U.S. can leave, but items can transit through. Here's my problem, Rob. Okay? As Johanna said, you're trying to send people back so you can actually spread coronavirus potentially to other countries unnecessarily. And now you're preventing these countries from getting supplies from the United States, but Canada relies on the very same supplies from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you can always tell what Trump is up to. This is pretty simple. He's doing this because of his incompetence and because of all the mistakes he made. He cost lives in the United States. He cost lives many other places too, but he definitely caused lives in the United States here. So whenever he's in trouble, he finds a way to blame it on black and brown people. It's somebody else's fault. So he's talking about drugs, black and brown people, to keep people distracted because it's worked for him. It's how he became president of the United States, and he's hoping that he can keep using this trick to stay elected, to keep people distracted from the fact that he messed this up. He called it a hoax, and it's the worst pandemic any of us have ever seen within any of our lifetimes. So he's just trying to distract and keep people motivated by race and hope that people's racism will be distracted by what's actually going on.
Dr. Carter, I just don't want us to ignore, we talk on this show about black people in this country dying from coronavirus, but I don't want us to ignore that we're leaving Caribbean nations, African nations left to fend for themselves as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think all the points that folks hit on is exactly right. I mean, he wants to hoard these materials, but then he also says to the American people, I'm not a shipping clerk. So states have to figure it out how they're going to actually get these materials. I mean, we saw what the governor of Massachusetts had to do with Bob Kraft to get around this kind of stuff. So he's not above doing this to his own country. So what do you think he's going to do to these smaller nations that he knows that we're bigger than in terms of military, we're stronger than? He doesn't care about those places. And to a certain degree, I think he views this as sort of nature running its course. And if these people can't make it and they can't figure it out, then, oh, well, the world is better for it. So I don't have any doubt that a man that would treat his own citizens this way would have any compunction about treating these Caribbean nations this way. And like you said, he isn't here to stem the spread. He's here to make money. This is the same reason he is trying to test this malaria drug on prisoners, right? Because this is a company that he has investments or at least some entanglements with. It's the same reason that now he's trying to keep 3M from shipping N95 masks around the world, because he wants to make a buck. And that's what he cares about. He doesn't care about health and safety and flattening the curve. He cares about trying to make as much money as possible.
And Johanna, when we talk about, again, what is happening with those supplies, and now when you talk about trying to send people back, it is mind-boggling. But look, even what's happening with ICE, I mean, I remember in early March, I mean, ICE was targeting people in the midst of this, not even thinking about this pandemic, and executing all sorts of crazy, and they finally were, you know, the dogs were called off. But this is just the nonsense that you're seeing in this country.
Yeah, outside of the issues around immigration, as it relates to COVID-19, as we see the United States and Italy and other and other nations that are considered to be superpower nations are struggling in order to properly respond to this global health crisis. So can you imagine countries that are in Africa, how difficult it is for governments to properly respond, especially when it comes to the notion of social distancing. Social distancing is a privilege. For even in the United States, for some of us, it's a privilege. But you can only imagine how much more difficult it is in developing countries, especially in urban settings. So in Africa, many of the countries, for some of the citizens, it's either I leave my house and I go find food, or I stay home and die of starvation, or I die of coronavirus,
right.
because they just don't have. Some people just don't have the resources to actually stay home, right? So those equipments, they are needed for those African nations, and the research has shown that in order to properly fight this infection, social distancing is critical, as well as testing. I think a lot of the countries throughout the continent are not doing enough testing. Right now, the country that is leading in infections is South Africa. The numbers are relatively low for the continent, which is good, but it's still too early to tell. And another thing that works, that some could say that worked to the favor of the continent, is that the research tells us that folks who are really impacted by this virus are, one, individuals with compromised immune system,
right,
and two, those who are 65 years of age or older. The continent of Africa, the average age is 19 years old. So that could work to the continent's advantage, but again, it's still too early to make a call.
Got it.
But one last point I would like to make is that,
real quick, I got 30 seconds. I got 30 seconds. I got 30 seconds. Go.
Just like we have bailout private companies and private institutions, I think that the government should bail out countries in Africa as well as in the Caribbean by providing some kind of relief when it comes to their debt through the IMF and other institutions, so that they will be able to use those funds to rebuild their countries and strengthen their institutions, in particular the healthcare system. Because it's not a matter of if we're going to have a global health crisis like this, it's when, and we need to be ready and prepared.
All right, Johanna Leblanc, Michelle, appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Hey, fam, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications.